The question is that this bill be now read a second time.
My Lords, I welcome the noble Lord to his place on the front bench, and may I say, in reviewing the short list of speakers in this debate on second reading, I am very conscious of the fact that I probably know less about this topic than anybody else who's about to speak. So I feel peculiarly exposed coming immediately after the Minister and giving the opportunity to all subsequent speakers to point out where I've got things wrong. Nonetheless, that is the luck of the draw. As the noble Lord, and I will say at the outset, I do not object to the measure proposed in this bill. What I want to raise really is the question whether we have quite the robust bank rescue system that the Minister thinks that we have and that he said that we have during the course of his introductory speech. Silicon Valley Bank is the starting point of this. Of course, in some ways, Silicon Valley Bank was not a bank failure. The parent bank failed in America, but the UK subsidiary did not in itself fail and was successfully sold to the private sector, which is admittedly for a nominal sum, and the shareholders lost their money. But nonetheless, that is a good outcome, and we are, those involved, to be congratulated on succeeding in doing that. The bank continues to operate, and it is there in the private sector. No taxpayer money was thrown at it, and that was a successful outcome. This bill arises, therefore, not so much from Silicon Valley Bank as from officials thinking, well, what might have happened if it had all gone wrong? And would we need an additional power if it had worked out rather differently? And that line of thinking is, of course, also to be welcomed. It's good that officials think about what might have happened if things had gone wrong and whether they would need an additional power. But we might reach the conclusion, as I say, that we have a very robust system. What I'm saying is that it wasn't really tested very well. I think it's worth just examining the players in this system and how bureaucratic and inflexible that system has become as we have set it up. The responsibility for sorting out a bank failure rests with the Resolution Authority. This is a department of the Bank of England. Should it have to acquire ownership of a bank in the course of a rescue, it would become a subsidiary of the Bank of England. And as long as that continued, it would be, in a sense, as safe as the Bank of England, as we used to say. But further down the corridor, there is another department of the Bank of England called the Prudential Regulation Authority, and this wouldn't be having any of that at all. The Prudential Regulation Authority would be saying, well, it may be a subsidiary of the Bank of England, just as we are a department of the Bank of England and you are a department of the Bank of England, but we are going to insist that it is separately capitalised. And indeed, this bill is addressed at finding a route and a tool, an additional tool, whereby that capitalisation could be provided. So we have two departments here really not entirely working together, treating each other as alien bodies, and it is rather distressing. Then we have the FCA. Now, one of the problems that did arise in relation to Silicon Valley Bank, which is a sort of unusual species of insolvency risk as opposed to liquidity risk, I should say, as opposed to insolvency risk, was that it had a high number of accounts that were accounts of technology companies. That's a specialist business. These are ordinary accounts, current accounts, accounts for paying the bills and things like that, as businesses have to do. And some of these were large technology companies and some were small technologies companies. But as a man, they united in saying that if we can't actually run our current account on Monday morning when this all opens, then there's going to be the most unholy mess. Now, of course, one way of sorting this out would have been, in the old days, would have been the Bank of England to ring up the governor of the Bank of England to ring up somebody, the chairman of a bank, and say, there are only about 1,000 of these customers. Would you mind very much opening current accounts for them so that they can actually operate and we can release some of the funds so they can operate in an ordinary way on Monday morning. We'll sort out all the details later. But of course, there's another player up the road, not part of the Bank of England, the Financial Conduct Authority, that wouldn't be allowing any of that at all, because there wouldn't be time to do the Know Your Customer inquiries that have to be made. So another sort of bureaucratic step that we've put in place would have presented a very simple and obvious solution from being put into effect. And I really do worry whether this is, when it is tested properly, and as I say, Silicon Valley Bank was not a real test of the system, whether this is as robust a system as we would all want it to believe. Obviously, there is no political point scoring going on here. We all have the same objective when it comes to trying to ensure the systemic robustness of the banking system in the UK. There's then, moving on from the question of the systemic robustness of the system, there is the question about the FSCS, the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, which is already creaking and is a major charge on the financial system. This will add further to it in an unpredictable way. It appears at the moment the FSCS operates by way of a levy, which is paid in advance based on the actuarial likelihood of default in particular areas. I'm assuming, and the Minister might be able to tell us this, that in this particular case, if recourse was had to the FSCS, it wouldn't be by way of the levy, it would be by a sudden demand presented for money to be supplied, immediately, like we want it now, out of your reserves. Or, if I've got that wrong, and it is to be part of the levy, then some estimate of how much it's going to increase the levy by would be helpful. But it's not clear from the face of the bill itself, I think, which that is going to be. In addition to all of that, banks with, in addition to the FSCS levy, which is paid by more or less everybody, banks with equity and liabilities in excess of £20 billion pay the bank levy. Now, the bank levy doesn't go to the FSCS, as I understand it. It goes straight into the consolidated fund and is never seen again. Now, I fully accept the contention of the noble lord, the minister, that there shouldn't be a charge on taxpayer funds. But if the bank levy is there partly as a sort of insurance premium to help ensure there's a way of dealing with big banks if they go wrong, maybe that should be looked at before a further dip into the FSCS as a source of funding for the recapitalisation. So I'm going to end with three questions for the Minister. The first is, will he be able to confirm, and listening to his speech, I think he did confirm this, or half confirm it, that the bank insolvency process will remain the default, and that recourse to the FSCS, as envisaged by this bill, will be the exception and not become routine. I think his words indicated that, but if he was able to reconfirm it for me, that would be helpful. Secondly, could he tell your lordships about consequential costs, particularly legal costs, so that if the process is followed and a bank is recapitalised using FSCS money, but there is then some endless legal dispute that goes on forever, as there might be involving shareholders. Nobody knows how people are going to respond to these things. Whether those legal costs are excluded from the FSCS levy so that they could not be recovered from the FSCS, they would be a liability of the Bank of England, because it would be the Bank of England's conduct, presumably, that would be the subject of any legal action. And finally, would he like to consider the future of the bank levy and an assessment, at least, of the effect of the bank levy and the FSCS levy on the competitiveness of banking and financial services in the UK after this further addition to it? Because it is my contention that it is becoming very burdensome. and becoming a real charge on domestic banking in a way that is beginning to contribute to what we see on our high streets, which is, frankly, the disappearance of domestic banking and the services that we all so much rely on.